So you guys are going to have to help out. Yeah, you got to step up. Yeah, amen. There you go. Yeah, we have a lot to be thankful for. So much. You know, one thing, I got to just say this again. You guys have heard it. But I can't make a carpet. I have no idea how to make a chair. Microphone, forget about it. Lights, I just know that if I stick my finger in a socket, I'm going to get electrocuted. What else? Those ladies' paintings, I can't do that. You don't want to see me do that. You know, I don't know how to make paper. I don't know how to put a book together. And so as I walk through my life, actually every little thing I see is something to be thankful for. We have so much to be thankful for, especially in an affluent country, that I can't even imagine now, knowing that, having the revelation of that, I can't even imagine getting depressed about anything. Because even on the worst of days, you have something to be thankful for. Just breath in your lungs is something to be thankful for. And then consider, you know, I don't want to get off on this tangent, but when I start thinking about it, think about your hand, think about your foot, think about all this stuff that works. Think about your heart beating. You have no control over it. It's going to beat until God decides that you have your last heartbeat on this earth. There are things that we are so dependent on somebody for, and the Bible really basically says that we have no excuse because creation is so obviously beyond anything that we can control, even global warming. And we have to recognize when we come into worship, the gratitude that we can express can just start even with just opening our eyes and seeing all the supply that God has given us. Amen? And out of that, we're talking about this whole kingdom business that we're a part of, and that there are two kingdoms going on. Sean, there's a light reverb. Would you mind taking that one off too? We're a part of two kingdoms, and there's this dilemma. I guess the word we're using for it is conflict that's in the earth. And you can just look around in modern society and recognize there's a real conflict going on. And I don't know all the time who's on the right side and who's on the left side, but there's a light side of the kingdom business, and we are called into that to participate in the light side of kingdom work. And of course, we know just by looking around in the world, when we see people chopping other people's heads off, we know that there's wickedness in the world. I don't think any of us would doubt that now. I don't think we would have ever realized how wicked things could be sometimes. To think of the atrocities that go on, they're unthinkable. Even the things that happen beyond what we ever hear about, there are just unthinkable things that are happening throughout history. And what we see the Bible doing is putting people on the right side of that whole issue. When the wickedness was made known in the Old Testament after the fall, it says that men began to call on the name of the Lord. Why? Because they saw the wickedness that was in the world, and they knew that there had to be a better way. And so they started calling on this God. And so we find ourselves in that same position that even the Old Testament people were in, because now with the New Testament covenant, we still are called out to be, as we were talking earlier, the glory makers, not just in worship in a corporate setting like this, but when we go out into the world, we are to be announcers in everything we say and do, and everything we demonstrate with our hands and feet. We are to announce that kingdom of light, because there are people that are either confused by the whole issue or are just ignorant of the news, the good news, that Jesus has come to set this stuff straight. So are you with me so far? So that's our situation. All right, so in today's message, I had to revisit a little bit of what we talked about last week in terms of the fear of the Lord. Because I think that there's a great deal of, tend to be a little bit of reluctance to use the word fear in our relationship with God. And I want to express to you that that's been another issue, as I mentioned before, about why we worship and how God isn't arrogant. This was another thing that came up a lot in Bible studies or talking with people about fear. Well, we don't fear God. And, I just want to talk about that for a minute. But I wanted to start off with thinking about all the ways that we fear. And when you were a little kid, can you remember being really afraid? I remember things like walking home in the dark by myself at night. I would be petrified. And it was probably because of some movies I watched or something about Jack the Ripper or something, because back in those days, nothing was off limits. In fact, my mom and her cousin decided a great family outing would be for all of us, from the oldest to the youngest, to go see the Exorcist movie together. She thought that would be a good family film. So there we all are in The Exorcist. And so, you know, no wonder when I was walking home late at night as a little kid that I was petrified. But there are a lot of things we fear, right? There's a lot of stuff. Even in families, we perpetuate it. I remember my family were incredible practical jokers. So if they heard somebody coming home, coming through the garage, it was turn out all the lights and I'll stand by the garage door and wait for him to come in and then give the big boo, and then you for that one, split second, all the blood rushes out of your body or out of your brain. So I don't know if you attach some impressions to the word fear. But I wanted to talk about, when we talk about fear of the Lord, it really isn't like that. It is in this sense that if we are unsaved, there is something to fear, because in the Bible it talks about an eternity of separation from God. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. There's words that are used for it. But I know from my experience, I don't want to be separated from the goodness of God for eternity. And I know that as I hear about the wickedness that used to be in the world back in the times when men began to call on the name of the Lord, there were societies, and it was normal practice for them to kill their babies, to sacrifice their kids in order to appease the gods. And the wickedness went beyond that. Civilizations would murder one another and enslave one another. And we've seen it even up into the present modern ages. People are just not nice sometimes when they're put in a position of trying to advance themselves through taking from other people. So I understand that there's a battle going on between the kingdom of darkness and the kingdom of light. And I want to put myself in the kingdom of light. And it's not, like Abraham Lincoln said, it's not so much about God being on our side, us learning to be on God's side. I think it's fine, Sean, just battery. RF. Anyway, so we have this opportunity to get into the kingdom of light, and we have to recognize that part of that motivation was because we didn't want the consequences of being in the kingdom of darkness. All right, so you following me? So in that sense, yeah, there is a fear. But the other kind of fear of the Lord is this. And God showed me this week, because I keep trying to find ways to say these things so it reconciles in my own heart and hopefully will yours. When you fear other people and what they will say about you, that can cause you to act certain ways. Would you agree with that? We all are conditioned to be afraid of what people think, from especially school, elementary school, because kids can be cruel. How many know kids can be cruel? Because when they have all kinds of supervision thrown off, it turns into like the Lord of the Flies book or whatever that is, right? So we know that we do a lot of things in life to make sure that people accept us. And so we have this kind of unhealthy fear of the world. Can we agree on that? God showed me that polar opposite is what he wants from us. Not that we fear him, but that we care about what he thinks about everything we do. It comes down to just being concerned and giving care to, number one, what God thinks, and number two, then doing what he says when you inquire. Now, if you don't believe me, turn to Proverbs, the second chapter of Proverbs. And while you're turning there, I'm going to show you a scripture from Job. In Job 28:28, he said, "And to man he said, Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding." So what we just mentioned about the fear of the Lord in terms of rejecting the kingdom of darkness, that's the first step of wisdom, to let us know that there is a right way, and we want to remove ourselves from the attachment to the world's way, the dark way of wickedness that is basically taking to get rather than giving. So it says in Proverbs 2 now, it says, my son, if you accept my words, store up my commands within you, and turning your ear to wisdom and applying your heart to understanding, and listen to this, and if you call out for insight and cry aloud for understanding, and if you look for it as for silver and search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will understand what? That's the fear of the Lord right there. Recognizing that God has a way to separate ourselves from the kingdom of darkness. And if we'll recognize that and search with all our hearts what he thinks, what he cares about, what his wisdom is, then we will find ourselves operating in a relationship with him that allows us to not be, here's the word now, conflicted with the world and the light, kingdom of light. Because we have a good example of this whole conflict in the story of Abraham, which we're going to get to in a minute. But before we do that, I want you to look at, with me, Isaiah 33:6. And how many would say that for your impression of Jesus would be that he wasn't conflicted when he was in the earth? He was tempted, but I would say he wasn't conflicted. He always knew what to do, because he said he never did anything that he didn't see the Father doing, and he never said anything if he didn't see the Father do it. Let me switch mics, Sean, maybe that'll help. Check. So look at this. Jesus was not conflicted, and I'll show you why. Isaiah 33:6 says, he will be the sure foundation for your times, a rich store of salvation and wisdom and knowledge. And what does it say? The fear of the Lord is the key to this treasure. Now, this was all a prophecy about Jesus from Isaiah. And Isaiah is basically saying the fear of the Lord is the key to Jesus' example to us in the earth. If you don't believe me, let's look at Isaiah 11:1-5. It says, there shall come forth a rod from the stem of Jesse, that's Jesus, and a branch, that's Jesus, shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and of what? Fear of the Lord. The delight is in the fear of the Lord, or his delight is, and he shall not judge by the sight of his eyes, meaning he's not going to judge by what he sees here. He's going to judge by what he knows through his relationship to God. Does this make sense? So this is a powerful revelation to me, because I used to be kind of confused, not only about fear of the Lord, but exactly what my responsibility was then to be a follower of Jesus. Jesus had a healthy fear of the Lord. Can you imagine that? Because you never think that Jesus would fear anything, right? And you would certainly never think that Jesus would fear his own Father, whom he had such a close relationship to. But what he had was a respect for what his Father had put in motion in creation. And God says that though he is sovereign and can do anything he wants, he's established his word, and he will not exalt his own name above his word. He says his word has been established. And he even respects, in a sense, maybe fears what he has put in place. In other words, not fearing in that he's afraid of it, but fearing in that he has a respect for and an oath to not disrupt. Does this make sense? Is this getting clearer now of what fear is? This is how Jesus related to the Father, and this is how we're to relate to the Father, in that we reverence, yes, awe and reverence for what he's done, but not just awe and reverence, but we actually do what he says because we care about what he says so much, to be in a separation from the kingdom of darkness into this kingdom of light. I don't think I could have said it better. I spent all week wondering how I was going to say this. But that satisfied me. Is that okay? Are we good there? We're moving. All right, so here's the rub, folks. Got to step up here for this. Though we know all this, and though we all shake our head when we hear things like this, still operate in fear of the world. because we were born into the world. We were born into this fallen nature. And we were born into fearing not only what other people think, but fearing the consequences of things we make up in our head of what might happen if we don't do what we think we want to do. And so we mess around with this whole world, and we think the world is the way for us. Its methods are the way for us to be in this kingdom of light, even after we've been pulled out of the world and put into this kingdom. This kingdom has totally different laws and operating effects than this kingdom does. And yet, unfortunately, our dilemma is that when we get pulled out, our spirit man is made whole instantly and born into this kingdom. But we are a three-part being. We are a spirit man, which has a soul and which lives in a body. So we are put in this fun time on earth called ongoing sanctification, where we have to take what we know in our spirit and have it translate into our soul, our mind, will, and emotions, and our body. And so in a sense, God, it's almost like a little bit of a joke that God's playing on us. He's like, okay, you guys have been having so much fun in the world while I'm sitting up here and watching the effects of it and going, oh no, or oy vey, whatever a Jewish God would say. And he's seeing all this going on, and he's saying, okay, now I'm going to give you a taste of what I've been dealing with. I'm going to transform your spirit, but I'm going to let you kind of work things out in your soul and your body so that you get an idea of the battle that's going on. Because the battle with each one of us is really, the biggest battle is us, to get the plank out of our own eye, right? And so we have to learn the difference between this kingdom and this kingdom, the laws of how this one operates and the laws of how this one operates, and learn to let this one shape then how we operate in the middle, in the midst of that. Because we are in the world, but we're not of it. So we are to be an ambassador of this kingdom, going into this world, taking the laws of this kingdom with us wherever we set our feet. Those laws apply. And so we are able to change that world. Why? So that people in this world can also be drawn into the knowledge of the light, the kingdom of light, that God has established the way things were supposed to be from the beginning, and will establish them in the future soon when Jesus comes back. Amen. All right, so the story of Abraham is a great, great model for us, because he, like us, was conflicted. He grew up in a family where, for some reason, his uncle died a premature death. And we've talked about this the past few weeks, so I'm not going to, belabor it, but I'm going to kind of track quickly. So follow what I say. There was a reason why Abraham's father decided they needed to get out of this land. Ur of the Chaldeans is where they lived, and that's basically old Babylon. And so the father says, we got to go. So there was wickedness happening there, I'm assured of it. Although the Bible doesn't tell us many more details. They were looking for a new land, just like we're searching as sojourners for a new place when we start to see the separation of darkness and light. And we're not even home here in the world, really. Our home is in heaven, because we know that is where the truth is. God's truth of how things are supposed to be is established there. And we long to be there, and yet we're kept here for a reason, because we are now people that will help this transfer take place and help solve this conflict that is in the world. So Abraham found himself in this situation with his own family. His father got a ways away, and they settled in a town called Haran, which was actually the name of the brother that died. So it was a memorial. Where they settled was a memorial to the brother that died, because they were going out of the place where he died and wanted to bring a new beginning, like we have New York, New Jersey. It's a new beginning with the brother Haran here in spirit with us. You following me? This is powerful stuff. My goodness. Barely contain myself. And thank you for amening. I'm hearing some amens come up here. That propels me a little. So what happens? So Abraham's father gets them so far. His name's Terah. Terah gets them so far, but he says, well, I'm settling down here. And Abraham hears a call after a while, and it says, it's God's voice, and he says, I'm calling you out of here. Apparently, this isn't far enough away. And you know why? Because Abraham's father's household came with them. So though they had left this evil, wicked place, it was still with them in the new Haran that they lived in. So Abraham is seeing this. His name is Abram, by the way, at this point. God has not changed his name yet. He sees this stuff, and God's, this is a man's heart. His a struggle, just like you and I. When we see the world as it is and our heart grieves, we go, that's not right. Well, that's not right. Well, that's surely not right. I mean, there's things, you say that weekly, now daily, right? We see stuff going on, we just say, that's not right. And it grieves the hearts of people that though we're not righteous in our own way, we know what righteousness is through experiencing it with Jesus. And we know that this stuff isn't righteous. We know it's not right. And we want to be in a place where things are set right, made right, where abuse doesn't happen, where all kinds of atrocities against children and women and men don't take place anymore. We've all experienced it, and we know there's a better way. Well, Abraham was in New Haran, and he wants to address this issue, and God says, here's how you address it. I want you to get out of there because I will take you. I have a plan. I'm going to take you somewhere where there can be a new start for people. And ultimately, he says, I'm going to make you a father of nations because I see your righteous heart. That's the one thing I want to multiply in the earth. Your righteous heart, your desire to operate in a fear of the Lord and what he thinks. Are you tracking with me? So what happens? Abraham says, I will go. And he says, come on, Lot, let's go. And God says, wait a minute. I said, leave your father's household. Now, what is it? What are we saying? That Lot was a bad guy? I don't know. But I know one thing. Lot's wife was not so good because she ended up in a whole heap of mess. And you notice that she turned around when they were bringing her out of eventually the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. We all know that story. And when the angels are bringing them out, what does she do? She turns back. So apparently there was still family members in Lot's family that were still kind of tied to the world. And you notice that Lot's family, every time they encountered a situation, they kind of wanted to settle more towards the big cities, the Las Vegas and the Carson City or the Reno, Nevada type cities, where all I think of Las Vegas as maybe the Sodom, maybe the Gomorrah of the West. I don't know. We lived there for a long time, and there's a lot of stuff that happens there that shouldn't probably happen. But can I get a witness? Yeah? and beyond what most of us ever would know, even if we were there. And so here we are with Lot's family really having even though they're going with Abraham out of this stuff, they're still got a foot in kind of liking the big city life. And so as this whole dilemma unfolds, we see that Abraham keeps making choices towards wanting to follow God, but he's conflicted because he's in the household of a family that still wants to make choices towards the darkness of the world. Does this make sense? So he has, by not obeying God originally completely, he obeyed God by going, but he didn't obey the part about taking the family's house or the father's household with him. So what we have now is conflict. Everybody say conflict. And it doesn't mean that Abraham was perfect, certainly, because even in his own heart, remember when the first famine happened, when he got to this land that God had called him to, a famine happens, and what does he do? He says, let's go to Egypt. Now, God never said, let's go to Egypt. Abraham said, I know how to get through a famine. I'm going to go where there's a lot of people in a city, and I'm going to use that city and the world's methods for satisfying the solution to the dilemma that I'm in. But God never said, go to Egypt. It just says Abraham went. Now earlier, when God called Abraham out, he said, I will make you a great nation. It says, I will bless you. So in God's call to Abraham, God was already saying, I'm going to do it for you. You don't need to do it yourself. Does this make sense? How many of us, even when we get a call and even when we're obedient to what God has called us to do, we start devising ways of which we can finish that calling on our lives. We start thinking about, well, how would the world do this? How would the world start a church plant? How would the world operate as a corporation in the church? How can we use those methods in the church? And the whole problem is we develop conflict by bringing this kingdom into that kingdom. Does this make sense? Are you tracking with me? That is the dilemma of the church. That's why there's a lot of people that don't like to go to church, because the church is no better than the world, except it has a lot of rules that tell you you're bad and make you feel guilty all the time. And so they use all the methods and they treat you, badly. I could think of a lot of words to describe it, but I won't use any of them. And they call it the church. They call it the kingdom of light. But we bring people in and they get into this and they say, this kingdom's over here is worse than that kingdom. I'm going back over here because y'all make me feel worse. At least when I'm in this kingdom, they let me drink and dance and have fun. But when we come over here, we get treated like crap, if I can use that word, and we can't have fun and we can't dance and we can't drink. So if I'm going to have, I'm going to have a rotten life, at least I can medicate myself with this kingdom. Come on, am I telling the truth?
Yeah, preach it.
Thank you. Sean is our new Mike. Mike is in absentia and Sean is showing up strong. All right, so we can go through Abraham's life. Maybe I'll give you a quick synopsis. In fact, maybe I'll just read some of these notes so we don't miss something important. God had called Abraham out and promised him great promises. The promises were this: I'll make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. And whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Can you imagine if God showed up one morning in when you woke up out of bed and he just said all of that to you? And you believed like this was God speaking to you, like it was an audible voice that you had no explanation for. Can you imagine that? Those are powerful promises. Well, I want to say first, God has made every one of those promises for you. Because the blessing of Abraham, that's the blessing of Abraham. It is on the Gentile people as we receive Jesus into our life. So that blessing of Abraham, that blessing is a part of our promise as New Covenant believers. So you have this promise. So God had called him out and promised him great promises because he was righteous in that he was seeking God, like we talked about in the fear of the Lord. He saw the wickedness in the world, wanted to do something about it. Don't you all want to do something about it? His heart was calling on the name of the Lord. And you'll notice when you read the account of Abraham, if you want to go back in there and read it, it's in Genesis, starts in 12 and goes to the time he died was 25, chapter 25. He built many altars. He was all the time talking to God. Whether God was talking back, he was all the time talking to God. Because he knew that in this battle from darkness to light, he was going to need supernatural power to get through it all. Number two, he rescued Lot from the battle of 9 kings. Lot's family kept settling near places that weren't so good, and so he got caught up in all this mess. There were 5 kings against 4 kings, and they had this battle, and they took Lot and his family prisoner. Well, Abraham wasn't going to stand for that, not on his watch. That's his family. So he goes after and rescues Lot. When he gets back, Melchizedek blesses him. And then in different parts of earlier, I should have said that he went down to Egypt, like we mentioned, looking for the world to answer famine. God did not tell him to go. He cared about what people thought. When he got down there, he was afraid of what the Egyptians might do to him because he was married to a very beautiful wife, do you remember? So the first thing he does is tell his wife, well, you pretend you're my sister, right? Huh? Yeah, she actually was. So it wasn't a complete lie, you're right. But here's the deal. He was fearing what the world was like. Well, where did he get that impression of what the world was like? When he lived back in the world. He said, here we are, we're coming back into this big area where all these kings are controlling. We have to operate differently because we're coming out of a wicked world and now we're seeing a wicked world. So you see there's all this conflict, and he's still trying to operate the methods of the world to handle the situation. He didn't go to God and say, God, we're going to be in this area and they're going to think my wife is beautiful and they're going to kill me. He didn't say that. He said, I have an idea. And he went to Sarah and he told her, here's what we're going to do, Sarah, because I have it all figured out according to how I used to figure stuff out. Are you following me? Come on, now I'm going to give you just a second and you apply this to your life, because this has happened to all of us in the last week about 25 times. Every time something happens, we get an idea of how we're going to solve it. That's not how this kingdom operates. The kingdom of light has a whole different plan. The problem is it works a lot of times by patience. It works by faith. It works by trusting God even though you don't see the answer yet. It's like planting a seed. We've all heard it. When you plant that seed, you can't see anything happening for days till it sprouts up. You don't stand over that seed when you don't see it coming up yet and keep saying, well, it probably didn't work. Well, it probably didn't work. Well, it probably didn't work. And dig it up to see if it's working, because then you ruined it. So we have this system of laws and promises over here, and the way to access them have nothing to do with how we access stuff over in this kingdom. Abraham continued to demonstrate this. What happened when God promised him a child that would be his heir? Because he was saying, God, I don't have anybody to hand off this whole calling off to, and you said that I'm going to be the father of many nations and that all the world will be blessed through me. And God says, well, I'm going to give you an heir. Because Abraham said, I have this, this person in my troop of people, but he's not even a relative. And God said, no, that's not going to be it. I'm going to give you an heir. Heir meaning someone that's going to inherit all this and carry on the work of creating this new place that's out of the world, literally out of this world. And so here, Abraham approaches his wife and says, God's going to give us a child. And the problem is Sarah's old and she's barren. She says, I have an idea. And Abraham says, that's a great idea. And so here they go again, trying to solve the spiritual kingdom law promise by operating out of the world again. Now you see this over and over in Abraham's life. But you see it over and over in our lives. Because every time something comes up, we're so prone to go back to what we know works. Even when we're in a conflict in our marriage. We know it'll work if we just yell louder, right? We know it'll work if we make them feel bad, make the other person feel worse than we felt, or make them feel how we think they made us feel. You know what I mean? But it's natural. Here's the good news. Abraham made a lot of mistakes, but yet he is championed in the Bible, in the book of Hebrews, as the father of our faith. And he's championed as one who made a way for the blessing to come on God's people. He says all nations would be blessed through Abraham. So in spite of Abraham's conflict and in spite of your conflict, God has great mercy in understanding the dilemma that we find ourselves in. And you have an opportunity, and here's the key to the issue that we're coming up to. And if you want to come up, Melissa. We have an opportunity to use the kingdom's ways to address and to solve conflict. Now that's going to mean a different thing to everybody here. Because we're all on different levels of faith. But here's what the fear of the Lord is, and what its prescription is for solving the conflict that's in the world. Some of you aren't going to like this, because you're going to have to change your habits of operating in the world. The answer is, and we read it in Proverbs 2, seeking after God. Seeking after God's word. And seeking after what God thinks. We have to care about what he thinks about every situation that confronts us. And then what he says he will do. And he will do it, and we must obey. Why won't a lot of us like to do that? Because we love being our own boss. Because the world says, you can do anything you want. You can create your own truth. You can you decide that you're a tree if you want to. You can be a goat. You can be a cat, right? You can just be your boss over morality, over reality, over science. You can create whatever truth you want. Now, common sense folk would say that is ridiculous. Because in a large way it is, and here's why. Because God has established a certain system of laws. He's established a certain system of equations that hold natural reality in place and spiritual reality in place. And for us to redefine those or try to redefine those only mean that we're going to come up against the reality that is truth. There's a lot of people nowadays saying, you can create your own truth. No, you can't create your own truth. There is either truth and opinion. So you can have an opinion about the truth, and you can say you don't like the truth, but the truth of gravity, whether you want to admit it or not, is real. And unless you understand the physics of transcending that truth according to other truths that are God's truths, you are still subject to those laws. So, the key to all this is us finding out, caring enough about what God thinks to seek Him out. Now, you might say, well, I have a hard time hearing God's voice. I do too sometimes. But I'm going to show you something where I've seen progress in my own life. We talked about this a few weeks ago, about how you can pray to God or you can pray with God. To God is from a position where you don't understand what's going on, but you know that He is God, and God, will you help me with this? But notice there's a position. He's over there and you're over here, and you're hoping that in His mercy and His grace, which He's full to the brim of, that He will help you, and you plead with Him and you pray to Him and you hope that He will hear your prayer, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a stage of maturity where you get to the place where you begin to realize that Emmanuel, God with us, supplies us with a new position where we're not just praying to God, we are with God. He's inside us. The same God that was with God in the beginning. The Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. That Emmanuel Word, God with us, is now with us, literally inside us. And when we pray, we can draw that out of us. First, primarily by reading the Word, because that is the Word that was with God. And when we internalize that Word, it starts to grow inside us in ways that we can draw it out when we need to pray with God for a situation, when we need to see healing, when we know His will is to heal, and we pray that by His wounds we are healed. It comes out of us in the same way that when God said, "Light be," and the Word brought that light into effect, when we pray, "Healing be," that Word will bring that same healing into our reality. Does this make sense? But it's internal first, and it comes out of us. It's not external over here that we're trying to grasp onto. It becomes our very nature, and it bubbles out of us in the same authority that God, through Jesus, spoke into the world. You may say, well, that seems a little bit presumptuous. No, it doesn't. Because if you care enough about what God thinks, you're not doing it. You're actually proclaiming out of your spirit what God says about a situation, not what your imagination might conjure up. The key is to the measure that you measure it out, it'll be measured back. A lot of us want to pray maximum 5 minutes a day. And I'm just going to say, nothing wrong with that. No condemnation. Good. But you are probably going to get 5 minutes worth of value out of it in the rest of your day. Does this make sense? You're like, now this is the part where I said you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you. You're going to say, but I have a lot of other things to do than spend time with God. Because I have all this stuff over here that I used to do in the world, and that really makes me happy when I do it. But God is just saying, I put all those things in this earth for us to enjoy. But we are to love Him first. And to put ourselves in alignment with Him. And here's what I'm saying as an observation of my own life. When I begin to pray in larger amounts of time, or read the Word in larger amounts of time, there's a time period usually that takes place where I'm just reading the Word. But if I stay in it long enough, there comes a moment where I know something has changed. Sometimes I'll immediately know an answer to something that I was wondering about. Sometimes I will just sense in my spirit, something just happened. I don't even know what it is, but I just feel better in my spirit. When I read the Word and I do it for a length of time, I find that there is a goal in reading the Word, not to satisfy some sort of guilt that I'll have if I don't read it. It is to get to that place where there's a connection, a crossover, a translation from heaven to earth inside me. Then I know I've had a spiritual bread meal. Does this make sense? The same way when I pray, I can pray for 5 minutes and that's good. And I can go down my list and I can list everybody I decided in my own mind, in my own list-making way, all the people I should pray for so I don't feel guilty. That's not what God is calling us to. You can pray, and this is how I'm starting to experience in my own life, pray and just release myself to the opportunity to just be in God's presence. And there comes that moment in that time when something drops into me. Here's how I know the difference. How many of you, during your normal week or normal day, just feel sometimes unrest? You feel you're just uncomfortable about something. And you think, I know what I'll do. I'll go to the refrigerator. I know what I'll do. I'll go to a movie. I'll turn on the TV. See, that I'm telling you from my experience is personal. From my experience, there's something inside me that's crying out. And the answer is not those worldly methods to fulfill it. But when I go into this Word and I wait for that moment where it drops into me, or I pray and I wait for that moment when it drops into my spirit, I go, that feeling I had earlier is gone. Because I've touched heaven, and I'm now going out into the world with a supply that's within me. Does this make sense? I'm going out there knowing what God really thinks about me. Not all the vain imaginations that I had about myself a few minutes ago when I just didn't feel right. I'm telling you, like, I'm sort of the kind of person, I'm kind of a self-conscious guy and a little bit, by nature, a little bit timid, and I feel rotten a lot of the time in my life. Like I just wake up feeling like something's wrong. And I go, I know what I'll do. I'll go get started on my list of things to do, and I can get really good at being a list solver and making sure the chairs are straight at church and staying busy all day. But when I get home at the end of the day, I still feel that something inside me that's calling out. It's your spirit waiting to be fed. And yet we'll run to the refrigerator and try and fill ourselves up. And God once told me, you know what? You are a fat person in a skinny man's body. Because you just have a higher metabolism than a lot of people. But you have a problem, son, in the way that you gorge yourself sometimes.
It's not fair.
Yeah. Well, it catches up with you when you get to be my age, too. But you know what I'm saying? We look to the world to solve our issues. And for a moment, we might have temporary relief. But this is the key. The healthy fear of the Lord and looking to Him until He answers that hunger, that need inside you. And what will He do? He will make your way great. He will bless you. He will do the work. You don't have to go out to the church and straighten all the chairs if that's not what He wants you to do. You just listen and obey. He might say, you know what, that neighbor across the street needs you to just go over and shake their hand. See, He's got a whole different agenda for your life than we make for ourselves. And His agenda is very simple. Love people. Love me first. Take that love that I will deposit into you and then love other people. Does this make sense? Why don't you stand to your feet? Why don't you sing a little bit?
Lord, I'm amazed by